In this episode, we're going to go over the essential techniques to getting your models ready to be detailed. We've already primed 3 Primera Space Marines, so now the next step is going to be that we have to apply a base coat. Then we're going to go over inking. After that, then we're going to go over a sort of lighter dry brushing technique that is going to show a little bit of the highlight of the model. And this is pretty much like the first 3 steps to getting into painting. And if you get this right off the bat, your models are going to look a lot better than having to do it all kind of by hand and thinning the paints, or just sort of just going from pot to the model. I think a lot of people when they first start off is they just want to apply the paint directly to it and that's it. But if you go over these 3 basic techniques and you move off, like you kind of like branch off of this, you're going to be way ahead of the game very early on. And essentially what this is going to end up doing is getting your base coating done, and very effectively. You can mass produce this technique over any single model that you have. And I think this is going to be a really good foundation to starting out painting your Warhammer figures. So what we have here today is we're going to go through a 3 step-by-step process. We've already primed our minis, so we have 3 Space Marines, the 3 exact, they're from the same squad. So I'm going to show 3 different ways that you can apply the paint and apply this technique with different colors and different metallics, and maybe give you guys some ideas of how you can do this sort of technique. It can look kind of grungy, but the idea here is that you're going to have, you know, tabletop ready minis ready to go very quickly and not get too caught up in the details. So what we're going to go over is going to be, one is going to be a darker blue, which we're going to do a heavy dry brush over, and then we're going to ink it, and then we're going to do a lighter blue, which is actually a dry brush from Citadel paint. Then after that, we're going to try a different technique in which we're going to be applying a color, like a normal color, this one being the Death World Forest base. But then instead of applying a lighter green, I'm going to show you what it's like to apply a metallic over top of that and give it sort of this like grungy weathered look, and do that very quickly. The third one we're going to do is just the way that I have done silver for a while, and we're going to be using exclusively scale 75 colors, and I have a darker silver and a lighter silver. Fairly easy to do this. You can do this for Necrons, any sort of scheme that you want to go with silver. This is an easy way to do it. But within all 3 of these steps, which we're going to be doing is in the middle, is we're going to be applying Nuln Oil. So this stuff is important. You can get different kinds of inks and different kinds of shades that will then recede into the cracks of the model and really show the detail. First, starting out, Nuln Oil is great. I still use it. I love this stuff. So it's going to catch inside the cracks, and it's a good consistency that's not too thick, and it's also not too watered down. It works perfectly when you're using it on something like a Space Marine, Necron, something like that. So this is going to be the second step in each of these. I will post links below for all the paints that we're using today, including the brushes, and that way you guys can see exactly what I applied to each model. So the brushes we're going to be using today is going to be a large flat tip and a smaller flat tip. These are both Citadel. One is going to be base, which we're going to be using for basing, and the other one is a small dry brush, which we're going to be using for the third step, which we're going to be doing a light dry brush over top. Sometimes when you're using, later down the road, when you've used these brushes enough, they take on their certain characteristics that, you know, like the paint will kind of mess them up in a way, but for dry brushing and basing, sometimes you kind of want that like frayed and soft feel to the brush, so I kind of let them take on their own characteristics throughout the time in which I use them. So Citadel calls their ink shades. They usually come in 2 different versions. One is going to be gloss and one is going to be the normal. So normal is just going to be, it's going to dry, and it's going to dry kind of like just matte, not shiny whatsoever. The second version is going to be gloss, and so you'll see it real big at the bottom, gloss. That's going to make, when you do the wash, it's going to make them look shiny, and you might not want that effect. Especially when you're doing it over, or I mean, it's up to you. Like, you can do it with or without. Just do a little bit of experimenting on what you like, but just know that there are 2 versions when you're going out there to buy them. So make sure that you're picking the one that you want for, you know, for your application. For this, we're going to be doing the non-gloss version. So first, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take your bigger dry brush, your base dry brush, and you're going to want to dip it into the paint and make sure that you're wiping off most of the excess, and you're going to have to gauge this for yourself. So as you're going through this process, first start as light as possible. So take off most of the paint that you can off into a paper towel and get most of that paint off of the brush. And if you have to double check where you're at with your consistency, it's no problem just using the blade of your hand in order to test out how much is actually still on that brush. And then you're gonna go over the model very lightly, and then that way you get a feel for how much, you know, if you go light, then you're not gonna mess anything up. If you go too much in the very beginning, you could mess things up and apply too much of that paint inside of the cracks. So what I would suggest is you're gonna wanna go as light as possible. Then after that, get a feel for, all right, I can add a little bit more paint, or okay, I don't have to brush as much off. And then, or how much pressure you're going to apply to the model as you're painting. So the direction of the brush, you're always going to want to be kind of brushing like kind of away from it. Don't push the brush in. You always want to kind of glide the brush across the model in order to make sure that you're not catching too much of the crevices, or at least applying paint where you don't want it to be. Now later on, since we're going to have the step of applying the Nuln Oil, that's going to reside into those cracks, so don't get too concerned yet. And this technique is great because when we're using this 3-step technique, you'll kind of like, in a way, like mask some of the mistakes, and it will grunge the model up. It might not look as clean as the stuff that you're going to see on the box, but it will show depth and it will show contrast, which will make it pop on the table. So that will get you a nice clean dry brush look. In some cases, that could be done if you want to keep it there, but we're going to take it the next 2 steps. So for inking, you can definitely use the small dry brush in order to apply it. If you have more of like a kind of a finer tip or a medium-sized tip brush, that works as well because it gets into the finer cracks. But I wanted to make this kind of simple, so we're going to be using only the 2 brushes. Once your model is dry and you got your base coat on it, you're gonna go kind of aggressive with the ink, and it might look like, oh, like what happened to my color, but we're gonna come back to it with a lighter shade that is then gonna really make this thing pop. So you're gonna want to apply it in a sense that you're gonna be going in and out and kind of dabbing. You can dab, apply, and also make sure that the brush is wet and it's kind of flexible. That way you don't want to see brush strokes, but you just want this stuff to kind of just sit in the cracks. So after a heavy coat of the ink, you're going to want to let that dry for a pretty long time. And then I would say preferably at least 2 hours until you come back and do the lighter shade. So now that you've waited about 2 hours and the model is now dry, so you're going to want to go over with you're going to take your small dry brush and you're going to go over very lightly into the dry container. The best part about these dry paints from Citadel is that you don't have to worry about like the consistency is great for doing, you know, its purpose of making some quick highlights. So once you dip it in, you don't have to wipe off a lot, but you also don't have to like dip in and fill your brush. You can just kind of just get the surface and then brush off all the excess, wipe it across your hand real quick, and then you're good to go. And it's not going to run. It's not it's not watery at all. So I would definitely recommend for that 3rd step to use dry paint to do it. You can use other paints. You can use the layer and you can use other consistencies, which is fine as long as you get most of the paint off. But in order to do this step effectively and quickly, I would definitely recommend the dry paints. This 3rd step is going to vary in the way that you apply onto the model. You only want to catch like the very edges in detail if you can. You don't want to cover the model again completely because then it's going to do exactly what we did with the 1st step. The next marine, what we're going to do is we're going to go over a scheme that's going to be a color and then a metallic for the light dry brush. We're still going to be inking it in between, but the difference here is that it's going to retain a color undercoat, but it's going to have a dry brush with silver that is going to make it look kind of grungy and weathered. I've done this to an army. I kind of like this look because it looks kind of realistic, but it really makes the model's details shine because you're going to have a metallic and not just a brighter of the same color. The 3rd look is going to be a basic silver approach. I've done this on my neck runs recently, and this is kind of how to do just a good-looking, grungy, sort of contrasty silver. So we're going to be going over the same way that we did the blue, in which we're going to be doing a darker silver, Then we're going to ink inside the crevices, just the way that we've done it along the whole process. And then we're going to take a lighter silver and just really just kind of lightly go over the details. And then that's it. Then you have a good looking, like very heavy looking metal. So of these three techniques, we learned how to do a heavy dry brush for basing. Then we learned how to ink. And then after that, a light highlight dry brush over top of that. And hopefully you can take those onto your army or the next army, and you have a great foundation to start learning other techniques after that. Please like, subscribe, and pass this channel along to anybody that you know is just starting out painting, and I'll see you in the next video.